Nyala, a 12-year-old girl with an extraordinary untapped talent, saw a world of dazzling color locked within the gray poverty of her family's cramped apartment. Armed only with scavenged materials and a desperate urgency, her breathtaking art, born from the very struggle of her impoverished life, became an undeniable force. This is the fast-paced, inspiring story of a quiet genius who trades the smell of dust and despair for the intoxicating scent of oil paint and international acclaim, charting an unpredictable course from the urban shadows to the global spotlight. If you liked the video and have subscribed to my channel, let's move on to our story. Enjoy watching. The smell was the first thing to settle on you in Nyala's apartment, a stale, stubborn mix of fryer oil, damp concrete, and the thin, metallic scent of deferred hope. At just 12, Nyala knew that smell better than she knew the scent of rain on dry earth, a fragrance she only ever experienced in the crowded, neglected community garden 3 blocks over. Their apartment, Unit 4C in the Stonecrest Terrace high-rise, a crumbling monument to forgotten urban promises, was a canvas of perpetual gray. The chipped, lead-heavy paint on the walls had long ago given up any pretense of white or beige, settling instead on a mottled, sickly off-white that seemed to absorb what little light dared to enter through the single, cracked window. Nyala's canvas, however, was in her mind, a blinding riot of color she was desperate to transfer to the physical world. This Monday evening, the light was particularly poor. The single 40-watt bulb dangling from a frayed cord in the ceiling of the kitchen living area, a room that served all functions except sleeping, cast a weak, yellowish circle on the peeling laminate floor. Nyala sat hunched at the scarred, hand-me-down kitchen table, her small, focused shadow stretching long and distorted behind her. Her fingers, nimble and stained with everything from blackberry juice to cheap school-issue graphite, were currently engaged in a meticulous act of creation. She wasn't using paint. Paint was a luxury, an indulgence as impossible as a trip to the moon. Instead, she was working with spices and discarded coffee grounds. A small, carefully arrayed palette of cinnamon, turmeric, smoked paprika, and a few pinches of the vivid, almost aggressive red chili powder her mother used sparingly was spread on a section of flattened cardboard. She mixed these powders not with oil or water, but with a meager, sticky paste made from chewed bread and a little spit, a technique she had refined through months of secretive experimentation. The paper itself was the back of a discarded community flyer her father, Ezra, had brought home, its glossy texture already warped by her makeshift medium. Her subject was her younger brother, Kofi, who was asleep on the lumpy hand-me-down sofa, oblivious to the gnawing chill that seeped through the walls. Kofi, 7 years old and perpetually frail, was an embodiment of the beauty Nyala fought to see in their broken world. She was capturing the way his cheek rested against the fraying velvet of the cushion, the long curling lashes that brushed his skin, and the single stubborn ray of the setting sun that had somehow pierced the grime on the window to turn his dark skin into a field of burnished gold and amber. The turmeric and paprika, blended with a touch of the darker coffee grounds, became an impossibly rich, luminous ochre. It wasn't just a portrait, it was an act of worship, a defiant assertion of beauty in the face of ugliness. The front door opened with a sigh of rusted hinges, and Nyala immediately swept her supplies into a repurposed shoebox, covering it with a stack of tattered homework. Her father, Ezra, stumbled in, his body language a poem of exhaustion. He was a man made of sinew and quiet worry, his hands permanently etched with the calluses of a life spent doing back-breaking low-wage work. Today it was stacking boxes in a dimly lit warehouse on the industrial edge of the city. His uniform, a faded blue polo with a grease stain over the heart, was saturated with the smell of sweat and desperation. "Nyala," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. He leaned his head against the door frame for a moment, as if gathering the strength to cross the threshold into their life. "You working on that math, baby girl?" "Yes, Papa," she lied easily, her eyes flicking guiltily toward the hidden shoebox. She hated lying, but she knew her parents saw her art as a distraction, a fanciful waste of the few precious hours she could spend studying her way out of Stonecrest Terrace. Ezra and her mother, Aisha, didn't discourage her creativity out of malice. They did it out of a crushing, protective pragmatism. They believed in the gospel of the steady job, the kind of unshakable financial stability that could only be bought with high grades, student loans, and a profession that wore a tie. Art in their lexicon was a beautiful dead end. Good, Ezra said, pushing off the door and moving to the single working burner on their stove to put a dented pot of water on to boil for ramen. Your mother's running late. Double shift cleaning downtown. Some big reception they had. She said she'll be back around midnight. Aisha. Her mother was a hurricane of fierce, uncompromising love, her energy spent in an endless, invisible war against the city's indifference. Aisha worked 2 jobs, a day shift at a dry cleaner and a nightly shift cleaning offices downtown. She came home smelling faintly of industrial cleaner and expensive perfume, the latter clinging to her from the offices of the wealthy she silently serviced. Nyala often thought her mother's hands, raw and perpetually chapped from chemical exposure, were the most moving pieces of art she'd ever witnessed. Dinner was ramen and canned peas, a meal that had become a nightly ritual of bland sustenance. As they ate in silence, the quiet was heavy, filled with all the things they didn't say, the worry about the late rent notice tacked to the fridge, the shame of the hole in Ezra's worn-out work boot, and the constant vibrating hope that one day, their luck would simply turn. Mama saw a painting today, Ezra said suddenly, breaking the silence. He seemed to be looking not at the room but through it toward some distant memory. She was cleaning the office of a lawyer. Said he had this huge painting on his wall, all blues and greens. Looked like a storm at sea, she said. He paid a fortune for it. Nyala felt a familiar, sharp pang in her chest. A fortune. She imagined the sheer physical pleasure of having an unlimited supply of pigment, of canvas, of the space to paint a storm large enough to drown their entire apartment in color. The colors were so real, Nyala, her father continued, his voice taking on a rare, almost wistful quality. She said you could almost smell the salt. She came home and just shook her head. Said, a single piece of cloth and paint, Ezra, and it's worth more than a year of my life. It just felt wrong, you know? Nyala nodded slowly, pushing a pea around her bowl. She knew. It felt like a massive, cosmic joke. They lived surrounded by grays and browns, but the people who could afford to buy the sun and the sea and the sky were the ones who already lived bathed in light. Later, after Ezra had fallen into a heavy, snoring sleep on a blanket on the floor and Kofi was deep in the sofa's hollow, Nyala retrieved the shoebox. She couldn't sleep. The colors were too loud inside her head. The cardboard was laid out again, her makeshift studio lit only by the distant, stuttering street lamp outside. She pulled out a new, larger piece of cardboard, a box flap from a cereal box, and began sketching lightly with the stub of a pencil. This time she wasn't painting a person. She was painting the absence. She was trying to capture the feeling of the silence in the apartment, the crushing weight of their financial reality. She used the coffee grounds and a little charcoal dust she'd scavenged from a discarded barbecue pit, mixing them with a tiny amount of water to create a palette of deep, unforgiving blacks and somber, grainy grays. She smeared, she layered, she textured. She wasn't drawing an object. She was drawing an emotion. The result, even in the poor light, was startling. It was a swirling, dense vortex, a black hole of texture that seemed to pull the weak light from the room. The piece was suffocating, raw, and utterly honest. A perfect visual translation of the constant, invisible pressure that defined their lives. As she worked, she wasn't thinking about technique or composition. She was simply letting the feeling flow out through her hands, channeling her anxiety and frustration into the makeshift medium. Hours passed in a focused, almost trance-like state. It was almost 1 a.m. when she heard the faint clink of keys outside the door. Her mother was home. Nyala frantically tried to sweep the charcoal dust off the table, accidentally knocking the shoebox containing the Kofi portrait onto the floor. Nyala? What are you doing up? Aisha's voice was weary, sharp with the exhaustion of her double shift. She walked in, her purse dropping with a dull thud onto the floor. She saw the mess, the charcoal dust, and the dark, swirling picture on the cereal box flap. Her tired eyes narrowed. I told you, baby. Focus on your books. You can't eat colors, Nyala. You can't pay rent with pretty pictures. Nyala braced herself for the familiar lecture, the disappointed resignation. Aisha moved to the table to clear away the mess. She picked up the cereal box flap first, holding it under the weak light. She didn't say anything for a long moment. She just stared at the oppressive, swirling blackness Nyala had created. Then she slowly set it down. As she knelt to pick up the fallen shoebox, the inner cardboard containing the portrait of Kofi slid out and landed face up. This was different. The portrait of Kofi was the polar opposite of the dark vortex. It was a tiny supernova of warmth, the skin tones impossibly rich and luminous, the gold light shining with a defiant, gentle beauty. It had an intense, almost photographic realism that transcended the humble medium of spices and old paste. The image didn't just depict Kofi sleeping, it captured the essence of her mother's deepest love and hope for her son. Aisha picked up the portrait. Her rough, chapped hands trembled slightly. She held it close to the light, turning it. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She didn't see turmeric and paprika. She saw light. She saw soul. She saw a raw, powerful genius that seemed too vast, too magnificent, to have been born within the confines of their oppressive, cramped reality. She looked at Nyala, really looked at her, for the first time not as her tired, worried mother, but as a person confronted by an inexplicable force of nature. "Nyala," she whispered, the weariness finally abandoning her voice, replaced by a sudden, terrifying clarity. "My God. This is real. This is more real than anything in this room." The harsh light caught the shimmer of tears in Aisha's eyes, tears that weren't of disappointment, but of shock and a nascent, terrifying understanding of the burden of the gift her daughter carried. The air in Unit 4C, thick with the smell of old grease and deferred hope, seemed to crackle with an unforeseen, terrifying possibility. For the first time in the heart of their gray world, Nyala's mother saw not a distraction, but a dangerous, blinding color. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the core, that their life as they knew it, was about to be irrevocably, violently changed. The first step was taken. The genius was glimpsed. Now came the impossible question. How do you feed a fire this bright when you barely have enough to feed your family? The silence that followed Aisha's whispered realization was heavier than the apartment's humid air. Nyala felt exposed, not just as an artist, but as a person whose internal world had been violently dragged into the light. Her mother, still kneeling by the floor, held the portrait of Kofi, the one made of spice and bread paste, as if it were a sacred artifact, her eyes tracing the impossible luminosity of the child's cheekbone. Ezra, jolted awake by the unusual sound of his wife's voice at this hour, lifted his head from his makeshift bed on the floor. "Aisha? What is it? What happened?" Aisha didn't look at him. She rose slowly, her gaze fixed on Nyala. "Your daughter," she said, her voice rough, a low octave of disbelief. "Your daughter she's not just sketching. She's building a new world out of thin air, Ezra. Look at this." She thrust the small cardboard piece into his hands. Ezra squinted at it under the weak light, his expression moving from groggy confusion to a bewildered stillness. He recognized the subject, his sleeping son whom he watched every night, but he didn't recognize the texture, the depth, the almost heartbreaking vulnerability captured in the image. What is this, Nyala? Coffee? Paprika?" he asked, rubbing his thumb lightly over the rich, earthen tones. It wasn't the material that shocked him, it was the quality. This wasn't the clumsy work of a child. It was the intense, meticulous observation of a mind that saw the world with a terrifying clarity. "Yes, Papa," Nyala whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs, bracing for the inevitable, disappointed dismissal. But it didn't come. Instead, Ezra slowly lowered his hand, holding the small portrait with the utmost care. He looked at Nyala, then at Aisha, a flicker of something new, something akin to awe mixed with profound fear, crossing his features. "The lawyer Aisha was telling me about," Ezra finally said, his voice barely a breath. "The one with the storm painting. He paid thousands for it. If he saw this, if he saw how she makes Kofi's face glow," he trailed off, the implication too large, too impossible to voice. The dynamic in the small apartment had shifted seismically. The art, once an annoyance, a frivolous distraction from the serious business of survival, had become a glowing, dangerous problem. The family meeting was held the next day, right after Nyala got home from school. They sat around the scarred table, the air thick with unspoken worries. The rent notice was still tacked to the refrigerator, a silent, damning presence. "I went to the library during my break today," Aisha announced, laying a sheaf of crumpled printouts on the table. "I searched for young artists and art schools." "Nyala, do you know what a folio is?" "It's a portfolio. And to get into those special schools you need one. You need lessons. You need materials." Nyala stared at the printouts, her throat tight. The papers described a world of private tutors, expensive summer programs and high-end art supply stores. A universe as distant and inaccessible as the surface of Mars. "They want real paint, Mama," Nyala finally said, the words heavy with the knowledge of their lack. "Oil paint. Canvas. Brushes that don't shed." Ezra ran a hand over his tired face. "We can't, Nyala. Not now. We barely made the minimum payment for the power bill this month. Art supplies? They're a luxury we simply can't afford." "It's not a choice, baby girl, it's a fact." "But this isn't just a hobby, Ezra," Aisha argued, her voice rising with a frantic edge. "Did you not see the picture? It's a miracle. We can't let this miracle die because we're poor. If she is this good with coffee and old cardboard, imagine what she could do with real canvas. She could paint us out of Stonecrest Terrace." This was the new, terrifying hope that had taken root in Aisha's heart. That Nyala's talent was their single bullet solution to poverty. Nyala, watching them argue, felt a deep, sickening guilt. Her gift, which had always been her secret comfort, was now the source of their most painful disagreement. She quietly slipped away, retreating to the small, dark corner of her mind where the colors lived. She resolved to hide her art again, to return to her studies, to become the pragmatic daughter they needed. But the seed of possibility had been planted. Aisha, the pragmatist who lived by the gospel of the steady job, had become the radical idealist. The next evening, she came home later than usual from her dry cleaning job, her face a mask of determined exhaustion. She didn't talk about the lawyer's painting or art schools. She simply moved with a quiet, focused intensity. After dinner, as Ezra sat in the dim light reading the classifieds, Aisha called Nyala to the kitchen table. She pulled out her worn vinyl-covered wallet, the one she used to organize the few dollars and tattered bills that marked their existence. Nyala watched as her mother carefully counted out a small pile of wrinkled single-dollar bills, quarters and dimes. It was agonizingly little. "This is my emergency stash," Aisha whispered, her voice conspiratorial. "For medicine for Kofi if he gets a bad cold. It's everything I've managed to save from tipping at the dry cleaner over the last 6 months." The total amount was $47.38. It was a fortune built on tiny sacrifices, skipped lunches, walked bus routes, and iron discipline of deprivation. "Mama, no," Nyala protested, her eyes welling up. "We need that. For Kofi. For rent. We need you to be able to breathe, Nyala," Aisha countered, her eyes fierce. "I can't bear the thought of you painting the world with cinnamon when the oils are sitting in a store downtown. You need to know what that feels like. You need to know what you can truly do." She pushed the money into Nyala's hands. "I looked it up. There's an art supply store, the Palette and Brush, 7 blocks from my cleaning job. It's high-end, but they have a clearance section for student kits. Take this. Go tomorrow after school. Buy the biggest box of oil paints you can find, and a few small canvases." It was an impossible sacrifice, a massive, irresponsible financial risk taken on the sheer, fragile hope of a miracle. It was the most profound act of faith Nyala had ever witnessed. The next afternoon, Nyala walked the 3 miles downtown after school, clutching the wad of bills and coins so tightly her palm was damp. The urban landscape shifted from the monolithic decay of Stonecrest Terrace to the glittering, clean facades of the business district. The Palette and Brush was a pristine, intimidating space, all bright light, polished concrete, and walls lined with breathtaking color. The scent, a heady, intoxicating mix of turpentine, linseed oil, and canvas sizing, hit Nyala like a physical blow. It was the smell of possibility. She was instantly overwhelmed. She navigated past the impossibly huge, intimidating canvases and shelves of flawless brushes with handles like finely carved wood. She finally found the student clearance section, a small, dusty shelf tucked near the back. Her $47 was a joke here. A single tube of professional cadmium yellow was priced at $18. But she spotted a small, battered student starter kit, 12 tubes of oil paint, a small bottle of solvent, a palette knife and 3 small, primed canvas boards. The price tag, marked in aggressive red ink, $42.99. With trembling hands she took the kit to the counter. The clerk, a young, pale woman with paint stains on her apron and a look of mild boredom, scanned the item. As Nyala fumbled with the bills, laying them out slowly, painstakingly, the clerk's bored eyes caught Nyala's hands, the stained fingernails, the calloused tips. She paused, looking at the small stack of money. "That's it?" the clerk asked, her tone flat. Nyala nodded, her face burning with shame. "Yes, all of it." The clerk glanced at the girl, then at the money. Nyala's intense focus, her utter dedication to this small box of materials, seemed to register in the clerk's expression. Then the clerk performed a small, almost undetectable movement. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a low murmur. "You know, this box is actually supposed to be marked down a little further. Must have missed it. Total comes to $37. She processed the transaction quickly, before Nyala could register the blatant manipulation of the price. The clerk pushed a $5 bill and a handful of coins back across the counter. "There you go. You'll need a canvas clip too, you know, to hold your board up. They're usually $10, but I'm going to throw this used one in for you." She slid a small metal spring clip across the counter. "Go paint something beautiful, kid." Nyala stared at the change, then at the magnificent box of colors. A small, inexplicable act of grace in a harsh, transactional world. Her eyes burned. "Thank you," she managed, tucking the supplies tightly into her backpack. The walk home was a triumph. She ran, not caring about the sweat or the effort. She carried not just a box of paint, but a vast, terrifying potential. That night, back in the quiet, dusty heart of Stonecrest Terrace, Nyala opened the box. The colors, the bright, arrogant reds, the deep, luminous blues, the pristine, dazzling white, were blinding. The solvent smell was sharp and wonderful. She didn't waste a second. On the smallest of the canvas boards, she began to paint. She chose to paint the view from her own window, but not as it was, the gray concrete and the distant, flickering neon sign of a liquor store. She painted it as a prophecy. She mixed the luminous whites and rich blues to capture a sky she had never actually seen from her home. A clean, uncompromising azure sky. She painted the concrete outside not as decay, but as a foundation, a launching pad. In the center, she painted Kofi's face, not sleeping and frail but awake, smiling, bathed in a brilliant, unapologetic sun. The sun she had just bought with her mother's 6 months of sacrifice. The medium was a revelation. It was supple, cooperative, and radiant. The oil was dense, forgiving her mistakes and rewarding her precision. Hours passed. When she finally set the brush down, the painting glowed, a tiny, vibrant window of defiant hope. Ezra walked past her on his way to the bathroom and stopped dead. He saw the color, the light, the sheer, undeniable reality of the painted sun. He saw the fire that Aisha had described. He didn't ask her to stop. He just stood there, watching her, realizing that the $47 had not been an expense, but an investment, and that his daughter was now armed with a dangerous, magnificent new language. The silence of Unit 4C was now interrupted by a new, subtle, intoxicating scent. The smell of linseed oil and turpentine, the smell of art being born, replacing the stale odor of their constant struggle. Nyala was no longer painting to hide, she was painting to conquer. The transformation of Unit 4C was subtle yet profound. The pervasive, stagnant air of the Stonecrest Terrace apartment now carried the sharp, exciting tang of turpentine and linseed oil. Nyala's corner by the scarred kitchen table was no longer just a homework station. It was a makeshift studio, a small, vibrant pocket of resistance against the surrounding gray. Kofi, sensing the shift, would often sit quietly on the floor nearby, watching his older sister work, his childhood sketches forgotten in the face of her intense focus. Nyala's growth was not linear, it was exponential. With the cooperative nature of the oil paints, her technique exploded. The constraint of the makeshift spice paste had forced her hand to be meticulous. Now, the freedom of pigment allowed her spirit to soar. She no longer had to create color, she could simply use it. The intensity of her inner world, previously trapped by her materials, now flowed onto the small, primed canvas boards in thick, confident strokes. Her initial piece, the azure sky and sun-drenched Kofi, was a revelation. But her artistic drive was insatiable. She consumed the remaining canvas boards in a blur of focused nights. Each piece was an exploration. The deep, churning anxiety she felt about her parents' sacrifice became a turbulent, abstract swirl of indigo and crimson. The quiet dignity of her father Ezra returning home from work was captured in an almost Dutch master-like realism. His face a landscape of fatigue and enduring love, painted in earthy siennas and deep umbers. She was painting emotional truth, not just visual reality. The problem, however, was space. The single working window offered the only viable light source, but the fumes, even from the student-grade paints, were strong. Ezra and Aisha worried about Kofi's lungs, already delicate. "Nyala, baby, you have to find another place," Aisha insisted one morning, fanning the air with a towel. "The smell is too much. You're filling the whole place with that spirit." "But the light, Mama," Nyala pleaded. "I need the natural light. And I need a place where the air moves." Ezra, ever the quiet problem solver, had an idea. He led Nyala to the apartment building's fire escape. It was a rusted metal structure long neglected, leading nowhere but down to a cluttered alley. But at the top of their floor there was a small, 3-foot-wide landing. "It's dusty and it's cold," Ezra said, pulling open the heavy, squeaking metal door. "But the air flows. And the light is good until the early afternoon." It was perfect. It was a secret, forbidden space, technically against building regulations, but unseen by the indifferent management. Nyala claimed the landing. She set up her supplies on an overturned plastic milk crate. Her easel was the canvas clip the kind clerk had given her, secured precariously to the railing. Her new subjects became the immediate surroundings: the geometric patterns of the rust on the iron structure, the stark silhouettes of the city's skyline, the vibrant, tenacious weeds pushing up between the concrete cracks, small victories of nature against the urban decay. She was painting the Stonecrest series, a powerful, unsentimental chronicle of their ignored corner of the world. One afternoon, 3 weeks after she'd acquired the paints, Nyala was completely immersed. She was working on a piece depicting the fire escape itself, painting the metal with an almost aggressive texture, using the palette knife to convey the deep, pitted scars of rust. She used the brightest cadmium red, muted with black, to capture the beautiful decay, the color of old blood and stubborn survival. A heavy wind kicked up, catching her small canvas board. It slipped from the clip, not falling all the way to the alley, but catching on the next level's railing, landing face up on the metal grate of the 5th-floor landing. Nyala swore under her breath and, leaving her palette, scrambled down the stairs to retrieve it. As she reached the canvas, a voice startled her. "That's a magnificent red." Nyala looked up. Standing in the doorway of Unit 5C, an apartment that had been mysteriously empty for months, was an older woman. She was impeccably dressed in a tailored, brightly colored jacket, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. She carried a large, leather-bound portfolio under one arm and wore a pair of large, vintage eyeglasses. She looked utterly out of place, a bird of paradise in a dusty concrete cage. This was Ms. Alara Vance, a reclusive but once prominent art curator and critic, known for her sharp eye and sharper tongue, who had recently moved back to her old neighborhood seeking anonymity after a major professional scandal. Nyala had never seen her before. Ms. Vance didn't look at Nyala. She looked only at the painting of the rusty fire escape, now lying on the grating, bathed in the sharp afternoon light. "You haven't just painted the rust, child," Ms. Vance observed, her voice low and resonant, like gravel rolling over silk. "You've painted the age of the city, the sheer grinding weight of years. That saturation of color, it's insolent. Who are you?" Nyala, momentarily struck dumb, could only hold the painting tightly to her chest. "I'm Nyala. I live upstairs." Ms. Vance finally looked at her, taking in the paint-stained hands, the focused, fiercely intelligent eyes, and the old, worn clothes. She assessed Nyala with the same ruthless, professional scrutiny she gave to a masterpiece. "Your parents let you work up here?" "They don't know I'm up here right now," Nyala admitted, shame and defiance warring in her voice. Ms. Vance smiled, a slight, knowing tilt of her lips. "Of course not. Genius always finds a way to operate outside the official channels. Show me the rest of your work, Nyala." Nyala, recognizing an authority she didn't understand but instinctively respected, hesitated for only a second before leading Ms. Vance up to the 6th-floor landing. She showed her the remaining canvases: the portrait of Kofi, the abstract anxiety piece, the depiction of her father. Ms. Vance examined each piece in silence, moving them slightly in the light, testing the texture with her fingers. The silence was agonizing, pregnant with judgment. Finally, she turned to the portrait of Ezra. "This," she said, pointing to the hands, "is your manifesto. You've captured the tragedy of dignity. The light source is complex, almost unnatural for a student. Tell me, where did you study? I haven't, Nyala whispered. I just paint what I see and what I feel. My mother bought me these paints last month. Miss Vance removed her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. Last month? With oil. She studied the young girl again, her professional skepticism finally dissolving into a stunned recognition. My God, you are an untrained natural. A phenomenon. She didn't offer praise or platitudes. She offered a diagnosis. Nyala, your technique is erratic, your composition sometimes unbalanced, and you have no formal knowledge of color theory. But you possess the eye and the soul. And the soul is what matters. You see what others miss, and you translate it with an urgency that is heartbreaking. Ms. Vance turned to the fire escape door, suddenly decisive. I need to speak to your parents. Immediately. I can't offer you money. I'm not wealthy. But I know people. I know the galleries. I know the collectors. If you are to survive this gift, you need more than a fire escape and a student set of paints. You need a path, Nyala. And I know how to build it. Nyala's world, already swaying, tilted on its axis. The arrival of Ms. Vance was not a gentle discovery, but a seizure of destiny. Her secret, desperate art had suddenly acquired an agent, a formidable, slightly intimidating woman who spoke the language of the high art world. That evening, Aisha and Ezra sat stunned as Ms. Vance, now formally introduced, laid out her proposal at their kitchen table. She didn't mince words, detailing Nyala's raw, undeniable genius and the catastrophic risk of letting it go undeveloped. She proposed mentoring Nyala, securing an introduction to a reputable and free arts foundation, and most importantly, finding a space for her to work. A studio. You can't pay me, Ms. Vance told them, meeting Ezra's skeptical gaze. I don't want your money. All I ask is to be her representative for the first 2 years. I will take a percentage of her first sales, which I assure you will come. This is not charity, Ezra. This is investment in a market mover. Your daughter is going to be important. Ezra looked at Aisha. Aisha looked at Nyala, whose face was alight with a hope so bright it was almost painful to look at. The risk was enormous, trusting the stranger, betting their everything on an improbable talent. But the alternative, squashing that light, was unthinkable. A studio? Aisha finally asked, her voice thick with emotion. Where? Ms. Vance smiled, a hint of her old, formidable self returning. There's an old community center downtown. They have a rarely used ceramics room with magnificent natural light. I have friends on the board. We start there. Tomorrow after school. The papers were signed, not with a contract but with a handshake, a pledge of faith. Nyala, clutching her precious paints, realized her life was no longer confined to the 4 walls of Unit 4C. The door had been opened, not by money, but by the relentless, undeniable power of her art. The genius had found its champion. The community center studio was a revelation. It was a vast, high-ceilinged room on the 2nd floor of an aging brick building downtown, previously designated for ceramics but now largely abandoned. The scent of kiln-fired clay was faint, replaced by the crisp, clean air that flowed in from 3 large north-facing windows. The light, a cool, unwavering northern light, was an artist's dream, illuminating without casting harsh, deceiving shadows. This was the first time in her life Nyala had true space to breathe and to create. Her mentor, Elara Vance, wasted no time. Her method was brutal, pragmatic, and devoid of the sentimental praise Nyala had become accustomed to receiving from her family. You're not a child prodigy to be coddled, Nyala, Ms. Vance declared on their first day, laying out professional materials, thick, pre-stretched linen canvases, tubes of professional-grade pigments, and brushes that felt like surgical instruments in Nyala's small hands. You are a talent to be harnessed. I will not teach you how to paint like the masters. I will teach you discipline, endurance, and the business of being an artist. The first few weeks were a steep, painful learning curve. Nyala thought she knew how to paint, but Ms. Vance stripped away her reliance on instinct. She forced Nyala into rigorous exercises, weeks of drawing perfect geometrical shapes to understand compositional balance, mixing hundreds of color swatches to grasp the infinite, subtle nuances of value and tone, and grueling sessions studying anatomy from outdated medical texts. Your instinct is a river, Nyala, Ms. Vance would lecture, tapping a long silver fingernail on a smeared palette. But a river needs banks to give it power. This structure is your banks. The hardest part was the culture shock. The studio was in an entirely different part of the city, a place of clean streets and bustling coffee shops where people moved with a different kind of urgency. Ms. Vance occasionally brought visitors, other artists, minor critics, or old contacts, who spoke in a dizzying vocabulary of aesthetics, discourse, and conceptual frameworks. They would look at Nyala with a mixture of curiosity and condescension, seeing not a girl but a narrative, the poor, brilliant black girl discovered in the urban trenches. Nyala, acutely aware of her stained clothes and the stone-crest dust clinging to her shoes, learned to remain silent, letting her eyes absorb everything. Ms. Vance, however, was her shield. She dismissed the patronizing praise and the reductive analysis with a curtness that bordered on rudeness. "Focus on the work," she'd hissed to Nyala. "The noise will always be there. Your art must be louder." Nyala spent 4 hours a day, 3 days a week in the studio, and every Saturday, while Ezra and Aisha juggled their shifts to cover her absence. The atmosphere at home had changed too. Her parents were exhausted but hopeful, their anxieties now focused not on overdue rent, but on the future. Will this work? Is she happy? Are we doing the right thing? Ezra, still deeply skeptical of the art world, bought Nyala a cheap, durable steel toolbox to carry her supplies, a practical working man's offering to her impractical career. Nyala cherished it, carrying it like a badge of honor. After a month of relentless structural training, Ms. Vance finally gave Nyala her first assignment on a large canvas. Paint your home. Paint your truth. Nyala chose a massive canvas, the largest she had ever faced, nearly 4 feet high. It was intimidating, a daunting field of pristine white. She didn't begin by sketching. Instead, she took a large brush and plunged it into a mix of Payne's gray and burnt umber, laying down a powerful, aggressive base layer. Her subject was the interior of Unit 4C, but viewed from the vantage point of the ceiling, a difficult, disorienting perspective that Ms. Vance had drilled into her. It allowed her to flatten the space, emphasizing the cramped, suffocating geometry of their lives. She worked on the piece, which she called Stonecrest Interior, with a feverish intensity. She painted the peeling, sickly off-white walls with a texture so real it seemed to flake off the canvas. She rendered the single weak 40-watt light bulb as a small, futile sun, casting long, melancholic shadows. The furniture, the lumpy sofa, the scarred table, were drawn not as objects of comfort, but as barriers, immovable obstacles in their path. But she didn't paint with simple despair. In the center of the canvas, she painted the family's hands, her father's massive, calloused hand resting on the table, her mother's chapped, chemical-raw hand reaching for a cup, and Kofi's small, vulnerable hand clutching a worn toy. She used a palette of luminous, contrasting colors, ultramarine blues and cadmium yellows, to paint the life energy flowing between them, a connection so fierce it seemed to physically push back the surrounding darkness. This was her technical breakthrough. She married the classical techniques taught by Ms. Vance, perspective, human anatomy, light source manipulation, with her innate, raw emotional intensity. The finished piece was not just a painting, it was a socio-economic diagram of struggle and love. It was painful to look at, yet undeniably beautiful. When she finally pulled back and allowed Ms. Vance to see it, the older woman walked around the canvas 3 times, her hand pressed to her mouth. "The hands, Nyala," Ms. Vance finally said, her voice unusually soft. "You've given the pain a face, but you've given the love a light source. This is not a study of poverty. This is a study of survival and commitment. This is a masterwork of narrative painting." Ms. Vance stood before the canvas, her usually cynical eyes holding a flicker of genuine emotion. "This is the piece that will launch you. It is too honest, too technically perfect, and too utterly yours to be ignored. We are done with exercises, Nyala. We are done with hiding. It is time to enter the market." She stepped closer to Nyala, her gaze drilling into the girl. "I'm taking this to the city's largest, most exclusive annual Young Artist Showcase. It's the platform you need. You will be judged by the elite. They will not see a girl, they will see an artist who threatens their comfortable view of the world. Are you ready for that kind of attention?" Nyala looked at the huge, powerful canvas that depicted the entirety of her old life. She looked at the scars and the light, the darkness and the defiance. The studio had given her the skill, but Stonecrest Terrace had given her the voice. "Yes, Miss Vance," Nyala said, picking up her toolbox. Her voice was steady, no longer a whisper, but a firm statement. "I'm ready." The fire she carried within, once fueled by spice and desperation, was now being fed by fine oil and professional ambition. The next step was the terrifying, brilliant leap from the safety of her studio to the critical spotlight of the city's art world. The work was done. The exhibition was next. The annual Young Artists Showcase was held in the city's premier cultural institution, the Vanderbilt Gallery, a temple of marble and hushed reverence. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, dry champagne, and the nervous energy of ambitious artists and sharp-eyed collectors. For Nyala, stepping into the massive echoing hall was like walking onto a stage where the lights were blinding and the audience held all the power. She felt the immediate visceral culture shock. The other artists, mostly older teenagers and college students, were confident, well-rehearsed, and dressed in clothing that whispered of privilege. Their art, while technically proficient, often seemed to be in dialogue with art history, clever, referential, and safe. Nyala's work, by contrast, was a bullet point of raw truth. Ms. Vance had strategically positioned Stonecrest interior in a high-traffic corner of the main hall. The canvas, 4 feet of brutal, honest realism, was hung under a focused spotlight. It did not try to fit in, it demanded attention. Nyala stood by the refreshment table, clutching a glass of sparkling cider, her mother, Aisha, at her side, wearing the best dress she owned, her posture a mixture of fierce pride and utter terror. Ezra and Kofi were kept home. The financial risk of Ezra missing a shift was still too high, and the environment too overwhelming for Kofi. The initial reaction from the crowd was silence, then a low, simmering buzz. People would approach Stonecrest interior, pause, and inevitably lean closer, drawn by the unsettling reality of the perspective and the fierce, luminous connection of the hands. "It's a magnificent piece of social commentary," Nyala heard one critic murmur to another. "The elevated perspective, it's the eye of God or the surveillance camera. It's absolutely unsettling. But the light, Arthur. Look at the use of light on those hands. She's turned deprivation into a source of power. It's not just painting, it's a transcendent act of documentation," the second critic replied. Nyala's breathing hitched. They understood. They saw the purpose behind her work, the heart beneath the technique. Soon the buzz escalated. People began to cluster around the painting. An elderly man in a bespoke suit, a famous, notoriously difficult collector named Simon Heller, stood before the canvas for nearly 10 minutes, his back rigid, his face impassive. When he finally turned, his eyes scanned the room, landing instantly on Nyala, pointed out by Ms. Vance with a discreet nod. Ms. Vance, moving with the cold, practiced efficiency of a master chess player, guided Nyala and Aisha through the surging crowd. "Nyala, this is Mr. Heller," Ms. Vance said, her voice crisp and commanding. "Mr. Heller, this is Nyala, the artist." Mr. Heller didn't shake hands. He simply stared at Nyala, his gaze penetrating. "You are 12 and you painted this?" "Yes, sir," Nyala replied, her voice shaky yet firm. "Good," he said, his tone utterly devoid of warmth. "Sentimentality is the death of art. There is no sentimentality here. Only truth. And skill that is frankly shocking for your age." He looked at Aisha. "You live in this Stonecrest?" Aisha squared her shoulders. "It's our home, sir." Heller nodded, turning his attention back to Nyala. "I am buying your painting. Not because of your story but because of your pigment. The composition is aggressive, the color palette is daring, and the subject is unavoidable." He looked directly at Ms. Vance. "Name your price, Alara. I know you. You are not running a charity." Ms. Vance, utterly unflappable, stated a figure that made Aisha gasp, a number that sounded, in the context of their lives, utterly ridiculous. It was a sum equal to nearly a year of Ezra and Aisha's combined wages. Heller didn't flinch. "Done. And Nyala, I want the first option on your next 3 major canvases. You do not paint flowers. You paint the fire escape, you paint the factories, you paint the faces of the people who cannot afford to be here tonight. You paint the world you know. Do you understand?" "I understand," Nyala breathed, the weight of the sale, the attention, and the money settling heavily on her young shoulders. The moment Mr. Heller's purchase was confirmed, the dam broke. Other collectors and gallery owners, spurred by the fear of missing the next great phenomenon, rushed forward. Nyala's small remaining canvases, the studies of the fire escape, the portrait of Ezra, were snatched up in a frenzy of bidding. In less than an hour, Nyala had gone from a struggling artist working in a fire escape to a commercially successful professional. The checks and wire transfer receipts that Ms. Vance tucked into her purse represented a level of financial security Nyala's family had only ever dreamed of. Later, huddled in a corner of the busy gallery, Nyala and Aisha shared a moment of stunned disbelief. "Mama," Nyala whispered, her eyes wide. "The money, we can move. We can get Kofi that doctor. Papa can stop working the night shift." Aisha didn't answer right away. She looked at her daughter, not at the successful artist surrounded by admirers, but at the little girl whose face was alight with the raw relief of escaping a lifetime of hardship. Tears welled in Aisha's eyes, not of sadness, but of a joy so pure it felt dangerous. "We can breathe, Nyala," Aisha finally said, pulling her daughter into a fierce hug, ignoring the scrutiny of the elegant crowd. "We can finally breathe." The aftermath and the warning. The next day, Nyala's name was the headline of the city's arts section. 12-year-old visionary paints her way out of poverty, the Stonecrest sensation. Ms. Vance was efficient and direct. She opened a joint bank account for Nyala's earnings and handled the logistics of the money. She also delivered a stern warning. "The first thing you need to understand, Nyala, is that this is not a fairy tale ending. This is the beginning of the war," Ms. Vance stated, sitting across from Nyala in the quiet of the studio. "The art world thrives on a good story. Right now, you are the poor, brilliant girl who escaped. They love that narrative. But the moment you move out of Stonecrest, the moment your paintings aren't about your poverty, they will turn on you. They will accuse you of losing your voice or selling out." "What do I do?" Nyala asked, feeling the sudden, immense weight of expectation. "You do two things," Ms. Vance said, leaning forward. "First, you get a good, private studio with no distractions. We use this money wisely. Second, and most importantly, you paint beyond the story. You must prove that your genius is not tied to your trauma, but to your vision. Your next piece must be better, and it must confront a new reality." Ms. Vance's final instruction was a challenge. Nyala was to paint the exact opposite of Stonecrest interior. She had painted the confining geometry of her home. Now she was to paint limitless possibility. That week the family packed. Leaving Stonecrest Terrace was bittersweet. Aisha cried as she walked out of Unit 4C for the last time, not for the peeling paint but for the history. Ezra was quieter, helping the movers carry their few belongings. They moved to a small, clean apartment in a safer, quieter neighborhood. It had a proper kitchen, 2 working windows, and, crucially, a small, separate room for Kofi. It was a place where the scent of turpentine could exist without guilt. Nyala's life had been remade in a single night. She had the materials, the mentor, the validation, and the financial freedom. But as she sat in her new, clean room, staring at the fresh, new canvas awaiting her, she felt the pressure of the spotlight. She was no longer painting for herself. She was painting to defend her success, to prove her worth, and to build the next unpredictable chapter of her artistic life. The time for capturing the shadows was over. The time for capturing the sky had begun. The new apartment, though small, felt impossibly vast. It had clean walls, a working fridge that wasn't perpetually humming a dirge of impending mechanical failure, and a silence that was almost unnerving after the constant, low-grade chaos of Stonecrest Terrace. Nyala's new workspace was a dedicated bedroom, its walls already marked with the faint charcoal ghosts of preliminary sketches. The material change in their life was instantaneous and profound. Ezra had quit his night shift, moving to a single, less physically demanding day job. Aisha was down to 1 shift at the dry cleaner, allowing her to be home in the evenings. Kofi had been taken to a specialist, and his health was already showing signs of improvement in the cleaner air. Nyala's art had delivered the miracle. But the silence of the new apartment was heavy, filled not with the sound of poverty, but with the deafening roar of expectation. Nyala was wrestling with the blank canvas Ms. Vance had assigned her. It was a large, square canvas, chosen to demand a sense of balance and completion. She was supposed to paint the limitless possibility, but all she could see were the headlines, the Stonecrest sensation. The art world, in its swift embrace, had also built a cage for her. Critics, journalists, and Ms. Vance's persistent, high-profile contacts wanted the next Stonecrest interior. They wanted the narrative of hardship and escape, the gritty realism of decay and defiance. They wanted her trauma to remain her muse. "They want me to be a one-note artist, Mama," Nyala confessed to Aisha one evening, leaning against the kitchen counter. "They want me to paint the people left behind, But they won't let me paint the future we're building. If I paint a blue sky, they'll call me a sellout. Aisha, now more rested and clear-eyed, offered a piece of quiet wisdom. Then don't paint their blue sky, baby girl. Paint your blue sky. You are not a camera that only captures the past. You are the eye that creates what should be. They don't know what you see now. They only know what you saw then. Ms. Vance, sensing the creative block, took a different approach. She brought Nyala to the city observatory, a massive dome atop a university hill. She didn't talk about painting, she talked about perspective. The most powerful artists are those who move the viewer's eye, Ms. Vance explained as they stood beneath the great telescope. You mastered the down-up perspective of the fire escape. You mastered the ceiling perspective of your old home. Now Nyala, look up. Look at the infinity. Looking up at the smooth, domed ceiling, Nyala felt a shift. She was no longer defined by the height of her ceiling, but by the depth of the sky. Returning to the studio, Nyala made a radical decision. She would not paint the concrete, she would paint the cosmic. She would paint the ultimate statement of possibility, a deliberate high-risk pivot that would either cement her genius or destroy her nascent career. The canvas, which she titled Ascension, began as a total repudiation of her previous work. Instead of the earthy umbers and heavy blacks of the Stonecrest series, she used a palette of impossibly rich, synthetic colors, phthalocyanine blue, quinacridone magenta, and titanium white, colors she had learned to control with Ms. Vance's rigorous training. Her subject was light itself. She employed the techniques of abstraction, something Ms. Vance had only cautiously introduced, to create a massive, swirling vortex of color. It was a galaxy, but not a scientific one. It was an emotional galaxy, representing the chaotic, beautiful burst of energy that had launched her new life. She laid down layer after layer, allowing the oil to cure slightly between sessions, building up a texture that seemed to hold and emit light. The top layer was a delicate, almost pointillist application of pure white, giving the illusion of stardust exploding outward from the center. The composition was deliberately unsettling, a central explosion that seemed to be both pulling the viewer in and pushing them away. It was technically brilliant, a stunning demonstration that her skill was not limited to realism. Crucially, in the lower left corner, she painted a single, small, recognizable detail: Kofi's face. Not his frail, sleeping image from the old portrait, but his profile, awake and smiling, rendered in vibrant, sun-drenched yellow and orange, looking up and out into the chaos of the painted cosmos. It was her signature, her anchor, a tribute to the reason she fought. She had painted the universe, but she had tethered it with family. The creation of Ascension was a 6-week, intensive marathon. Nyala worked late into the nights, fueled by the terrifying need to prove her versatility. When the final brushstroke was applied, she was exhausted but certain. Ms. Vance arranged a private viewing for a small, curated group of the city's most influential critics and collectors, a risky move meant to control the narrative. The tension in the room was palpable when the canvas was unveiled. Silence. Then the reaction was polarized. It's a magnificent use of color theory, Alara, one critic argued. But it's a retreat. She's abandoned her narrative. The power of Stonecrest was its unflinching realism. This is a flight of fancy. Nonsense, countered another, a younger gallery owner. This is the necessary statement. She is telling the establishment, my vision is not defined by your limitations. It's a work of liberation. The sheer scale, the textural mastery, it proves her genius is transcendent, not circumstantial. Mr. Heller, the collector, simply walked straight to Ms. Vance. It's a masterpiece, he announced, cutting through the debate. It is not what I expected, but it is exactly what I demanded. Her voice is not the environment. Her voice is the lens through which she views the environment. I'll take it. And I'm commissioning her for a triptych on the theme of urban mythology. The success of Ascension was more than a financial victory, it was an artistic declaration of independence. Nyala had stared down the weight of expectation and refused to be confined by her biography. She had proven that her gift was a universal force, not a localized phenomenon. The next morning, the new headlines reflected her pivot. From concrete to cosmos, Nyala's ascension proves her vision is limitless. Nyala, seeing the article, felt the heavy, anxious knot in her chest finally unwind. She had earned the right to paint anything. The challenge now was no longer about proving her worth, but about maintaining the discipline and focus required to sustain a career under an ever-brightening spotlight, a spotlight that would soon be shining on a national, even global, stage. Her next step would be the ultimate test of her endurance and her commitment to the truth of her art. Nyala's life, once measured in the meager distance between her home and the dry cleaner, now spanned continents. The success of Ascension propelled her past local fame and onto the international stage. Ms. Vance, her formidable champion, managed the fallout with expert precision. She fielded offers from galleries in London, Paris, and Tokyo, securing Nyala a series of exclusive exhibitions that solidified her reputation not as a flash in the pan, but as a generational talent. At 13, Nyala was no longer a young artist, she was a brand. The relentless pace was exhilarating but exhausting. Nyala was flown to New York for a featured profile in a major art magazine, where photographers captured her intense gaze and paint-stained fingers. She gave controlled, concise interviews, repeating the narrative of the fire escape and the cosmos, learning to distill her complex artistic journey into digestible sound bites. She missed school, but her education was now being conducted in museums and major galleries, under the tutelage of Ms. Vance. The family thrived in their new stability. Ezra and Aisha were bewildered but fiercely protective of their daughter's routine, running a tightly organized household to ensure Nyala had the peace she needed. Kofi, healthier and less burdened by the unspoken anxieties of poverty, was her quiet anchor, often reading next to her while she painted. However, the spotlight exacted a toll. The immense financial success meant she could buy any material, any canvas, but it could not buy back her anonymity. Everywhere she went, she was recognized. People wanted a piece of her story, her time, and her energy. "They are trying to own your talent, Nyala," Ms. Vance warned her during a brief moment between flights. "Your genius is now a public commodity. You must guard your creative sanctuary fiercely. Say no to everything that does not feed the work." The ultimate test of Nyala's new status arrived in the form of a prestigious high-stakes commission to create a mural for the new International Youth Cultural Center, slated to open in a major European capital. The theme was Bridging Divides, and the wall was immense, nearly 60 feet long. It was an intimidating prospect, a canvas so large it demanded an entirely new approach to scale and vision. Nyala accepted. She viewed it as a chance to create her legacy piece, a work that went beyond her personal narrative to speak to a global audience. She secured a colossal hangar-like temporary studio in a disused industrial space. For weeks she struggled with the scale. Her precise, intimate style, honed on small canvases, felt lost on the vast wall. She had to learn to paint not with her wrist but with her entire body. Her breakthrough came not from technique but from memory. She realized that the mural needed the same profound human connection that anchored her other work. She chose to depict a vast, sweeping landscape, a mythological future city built on shared effort and knowledge. The mural, which she titled The Gathering Ascent, was a dizzying fusion of architectural geometry and organic life. She painted soaring towers that resembled the geometry of her old Stonecrest fire escape, but rendered in gleaming silver and glass. Below, she painted figures, a diverse, countless multitude of people, not in conflict but in the act of building together. The pivotal element was in the center. She painted a colossal symbolic ladder connecting the earth to the sky, rendered with the same defiant rusty red she had used for the decay of the Stonecrest railing, but here the rust was layered with gold leaf, signifying the refinement of hardship into resilience. She included detailed portraits of working hands, referencing her father's strength and her mother's perseverance, but alongside them were the hands of scientists, musicians, and teachers, all reaching, lifting, and building. This required a significant shift in her technique. Nyala began to work with assistants, directing them on color mixing and base layers, a new challenge in leadership and communication. She used industrial equipment, including a mechanical lift, to reach the top sections of the wall. She was no longer just a painter, she was the architect of a massive visual ecosystem. The pressure was unrelenting. News crews visited the studio. The city's mayor and international cultural attaches made official inspection visits. Every stroke was scrutinized, every color choice debated in the press. During one particularly stressful session, as a high-ranking official questioned the use of the aggressive red for the central ladder, suggesting a more calm blue, Nyala snapped. "The red stays," she stated, climbing down from the lift, covered in paint and exhaustion. "The red is the pain of the climb. The division is real. You cannot build a bridge without acknowledging the chasm. The gold leaf is the hope, but the red is the truth. My art is not a polite suggestion, sir. It is a documented reality magnified." Her defiance and clarity silenced the official. Ms. Vance smiled, realizing that the young artist was no longer vulnerable to external pressure. When the gathering ascent was finally unveiled during the center's grand opening, the global reaction was electric. Critics hailed it as a work of optimistic realism, a visual thesis on the power of collective will. The magnitude of the piece, combined with Nyala's age, made her a cultural sensation. Nyala stood before her creation, the vast mural stretching out like a dream made solid. She saw the influence of everything that had come before: the light from Kofi's portrait, the perspective from the fire escape, and the explosive color of ascension. She had found her voice, and it was loud, clear, and massive enough to fill an international hall. She had secured her place in the upper echelon of the art world. The next and final chapter of her story would be about navigating that height, finding a balance between her explosive career and the quiet, personal life that remained her true inspiration. She had answered the question of what she could paint. Now she had to answer the question of who she would become. 4 years had passed since Nyala's explosive debut. At 16, she was an anomaly, a globally recognized master, balancing the demands of a high-profile career with the rigors of finishing high school through an accelerated program. Her life was a meticulously scheduled calendar of exhibitions, commissions, and private studio time. She now maintained 2 studios, one large, commercial space for her monumental commissions and a smaller, private sanctuary she called the Quiet Room. The family was thriving. They lived comfortably in a bright, spacious house, and Ezra had established a small, independent carpentry business, using the stability of their life to finally pursue his own quiet craftsmanship. Kofi, now 11, was healthy and Nyala's most devoted fan, having inherited his sister's quiet intensity. Yet, Nyala felt a subtle, gnawing disconnect. She had successfully navigated the pressures of the art world, proving that her genius was not circumstantial. She had painted the cosmos and the collective future. But in the process of defending her talent against the external noise, she realized she had begun painting for the conversation, for the critics, and for the global demand. The spontaneous joy, the fierce, private necessity that had driven her with spice and cardboard, had been replaced by professional discipline. Ms. Vance, now Nyala's lifelong confidant and manager, recognized the exhaustion in the artist's eyes. "You've won the war, Nyala," Ms. Vance said one afternoon, watching her pace the massive commercial studio. "You've proven your worth. You've earned your freedom. Now, what does the free Nyala want to paint?" The question resonated. Nyala realized she hadn't painted a truly personal work, one free of social commentary, professional obligation, or narrative defense, since Ascension. She hadn't painted simply because she must. She decided to take a deliberate, 1-month hiatus from all commissions and public appearances. She retreated to the Quiet Room, a space that held only her original, scarred kitchen table and a small, unused easel. She left behind her industrial pigments, her assistants, and her towering canvases. She began to search for her original spark. She looked through her old materials, finally finding the battered shoebox from Stonecrest Terrace, still containing the spice-stained portrait of Kofi. Holding that piece, she remembered the smell of the dust and the sheer, defiant act of finding light in the darkness. Her final, most personal project would be a return to the fundamental truth of her art: her relationship with her brother, Kofi, and the simple, profound beauty of their bond. Nyala didn't buy a new, expensive canvas. She procured a simple mid-sized square of unprimed cotton canvas, stretched lightly. She chose a palette of only 4 colors, mixed to evoke the tones of their earliest life: burnt sienna, raw umber, white, and a single, pure cadmium yellow. Her subject was Kofi, not as the symbolic centerpiece of a grand mural, but as a boy in a moment of uncomplicated peace. She set up a simple scene in the Quiet Room, capturing him as he sat reading, his head bent, illuminated by a single focused lamp, a direct echo of the poor light of Unit 4C, but now used as a deliberate artistic choice. The piece, which she called The Reader's Light, was a masterclass in distilled realism and emotional restraint. She used the oils thinly, allowing the rough, brown texture of the unprimed canvas to bleed through, lending the entire image an earthy, grounding warmth. There were no aggressive strokes or political statements, just soft shadows, the precise rendering of the lamplight on his book, and the quiet curve of his neck. The focus was the light. The single source of yellow cadmium light, perfectly blended with white, seemed to pour from the page and onto Kofi's face, illuminating the smooth contours of his skin. It was the antithesis of the weak bulb in Stonecrest. It was the light of knowledge, of sanctuary, and of achieved peace. It took Nyala 3 weeks. The process was slow, meditative, and utterly absorbing. It was the first time in years she had painted without the shadow of a deadline or a critic looking over her shoulder. She painted to feel the connection, to remember the profound joy of her first secret creations. She was painting for herself. When she finally signed the piece, her signature now a confident, elegant script, she felt a profound sense of completion. She had proven she could paint the future. Now she had painted the achieved present and found the peace within it. Miss Vance was the first to see it. She walked in and found Nyala sitting quietly before the finished canvas. Miss Vance didn't speak the jargon of the art world. She simply looked at the boy bathed in the golden, simple light. "It's flawless, Nyala," she said softly, her eyes glistening. "It's small, but it contains all the truth of the mural and all the heart of the cardboard. You haven't lost your voice, Nyala. You've refined it to its essential note." Nyala decided to do something unprecedented. She announced that the reader's light would never be for sale. It was her gift to her family, a permanent fixture in their home, a testament to the journey they had shared. At the next major press conference, an event announcing her full scholarship to the world-renowned Académie des Beaux-Arts in Paris, a journalist asked her, as always, about the pressure of her age and her background. Nyala, now poised and articulate, met his gaze without hesitation. "My early life in Stonecrest Terrace gave me a fire and a subject, and I am eternally grateful for the strength it required," she said. "But my success is not defined by my escape from hardship, but by my freedom to choose my canvas. I am an artist because I must see the world clearly, and I am an artist because I have the courage to paint the light I find there, whether it's on a fire escape or in the peaceful face of my brother." She looked out at the room full of cameras and flashing lights. "The best lesson I learned is this: you cannot eat colors, but you can feed the world with light. And that light comes from within, not from the materials you use." Nyala, now poised for the final stage of her formal education and the rest of her long career, had truly come full circle. She had conquered the world and, in the end, had quietly returned to the simple, untainted canvas of her own heart, ready to begin again. Her story was a powerful, enduring testament to the genius that will always find a way to bloom, even from the hardest ground. Dear viewer, if you've watched up to this point, thank you for your support. I have a small request. If you enjoy my stories, you can subscribe to the channel, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts about the stories in the comments. Enjoy watching. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video.